My name's Stefan. It's with a T, contrary to what's been displayed around without it. So I don't know about you guys, but I feel like so far my TPM abilities have leveled up since this morning. It's been an action-packed sessions so far. And in the spirit of contributing my little grain of sand, today we're going to focus on team dynamics, the tribal heartbeat to decode the engineering culture. But first, let's rewind a little bit. As was mentioned, my formative years are rooted in anthropology. If you were to tell my anthropologist undergraduate self that I would be a TPM and taking to the stage to talk about how those formative years were really the path to get here, my first question would actually be, what the heck is a TPM? And I don't buy it, especially in tech. So how does one exactly go from anthropology to tech? Well, you graduate with your bachelor's, and then you decide to pursue business, and you go and do an MBA. But sticking to the anthropology background, you do it on international business to really see how your understanding of culture, people, help you be able to drive business. Since then, I've managed SaaS implementation projects in hospitality and e-commerce tech. I was traveling internationally. It was quite a great opportunity. I've lived in 9 countries since my entering into the business world in tech. And now at Algolia, I've mostly been focusing on internal technical programs, mostly rooted within our billing, usage, identity models, as well as some of our dashboard initiatives. And every step of the way, as was mentioned, I'm always relying on that anthropology background. So why anthropology? I'm sure most of you are wondering, why at a TPM conference where we mostly work in tech? Well, just like being a TPM, anthropology is all about curiosity. It's about the why. Why are we the way we are? Why did cultures come about? Why did they disappear? Why did they meld and transform and become what they were? And why so many languages in small but mighty countries? So like, fun fact, in Papua New Guinea, you have 711 languages. And that's just due to the fact of the terrain and the lay of the land that led to separation of tribes and clans that ended up in that many languages. Anthropology is open-ended, so I like to think that tech is human. It's made by humans, for humans. And let's take our friends at Anthropic. They come about, well, aside from having a great name, which in philosophy means having to do or concerning with human life, its stated goal is to responsibly advance the field of generative AI, deploying safe and reliable AI models for public use being us humans. So, by the textbooks, it's a scientific study of human cultures, societies, and behaviors across time and space. It combines fieldwork, observation, and analysis to give you the insights into how different groups of people interact, live, and make sense of their world. It offers valuable insights into behavior, context, and human interactions. And for our purposes today, human interactions in tech spaces. Let's run with that concept. Anthropology as a discipline evolves. We have the major 4 fields, which are physical and biological, that has to do with human evolution. Social-cultural, as the name states, society and culture and how it influences human life. Linguistic, how languages actually help make context and sense of the world around the people. And archaeological, the study of human life and history through analysis of artifacts, structures, and other discovered items. Not to be confused with paleontology. Think Roman Empire, not dinosaurs. So from these, we've had new emerging subfields. We have digital anthropology, which studies the relationship between humans and digital era technology, and technoanthropology, which examines the cultural, social, and ethical implications of that technology. Engineering rituals, like daily stand-ups, code reviews, PRs, they mirror social cultural practices and establish norms. They reinforce group identity. Never underestimate the power of a team or organizational mascot. I've created some for some of my teams, and it's the best way to have that kind of driving force behind what we're working on. And it facilitates knowledge transfer. Just as social rituals mark milestones and maintain that cohesion, engineering rituals structure workflows, build team unity, and propagate the best practices. This parallel helps in understanding that just like society, engineering teams develop their own microcultures with distinct values, languages, and customs that shape their behavior and output. With a strong understanding of the human behavior, cultural nuances, and social dynamics, anthropology provides a unique lens into internal processes. It helps to analyze teams' cultures, communication patterns, and social dynamics. During the Scrum rituals, for example, this lens can identify the subtle cues, behavioral, and cultural factors that will influence decision-making and collaboration. These insights then provide us that understanding of the engineering teams. By understanding the microculture, this gives us the ability to then optimize agile practices, improve team cohesion, and enhance problem-solving capabilities, ultimately leading to better engineering outcomes. Let's take Spotify, for example. This model has been around since 2012, and it's driven mainly for the autonomy of scaling agile and emphasizing the importance of culture and network. Concepts of squads that are encompassed by tribe, that have the opportunity for cross-pollination between chapters and guilds, gives this kind of utilization of anthropology in the workspace. So squads are cross-functional autonomous teams. They focus on one area, they have their unique mission, and they have the ability to establish their own agile methodology and framework. When there's multiple squads that coordinate with each other, then they come together to create a tribe. This helps in building alignment across those squads, and it can typically consist between 40 and 150 members, and there's a tribe lead that helps drive that alignment and coordination across the squads. Via the chapters, it's important that specialists align on the best practices and methodologies being used in their day-to-day. It's basically that family that a specialist belongs to. And similarly, DPMs, depending on the company structure that you have, can belong to chapters. For instance, at Algolia, there's only 3 of us. We all report into different managers, but we come together at least once a month, quarter, to kind of share ideas and see where some blockers and things we can work on to kind of help each other out. And then there's guilds. It's basically a community of interest. It's typically voluntary, and it really just gives that sense of community. For example, I was at Datadog conference in New York a month ago, and there was such a innate, visible culture that you can see that everybody actually talked about the guilds that they were a part of, and in their words, they help to foster an inclusive environment, encouraging collaboration, and an increased sense of belonging across departments and regions. Some of these guilds that they spoke about are the Somos for Latinx community, parents, guardians. I mean, I think they could have named it parents, but I mean, missed opportunity there. And then there's the Women's Guild. So what are these anthropological methods, and how can we put them in practice? Well, there's participant observation, which really helps to understand the daily life of the engineering teams. Joining those engineering rituals, meetings, code reviews are going to really help in giving you that sense of what is the lay of the land. In person when possible, although in today's landscape, you're mostly going to be doing it virtually. These insights can then help you in understanding the team dynamics and unspoken rules that influence project outcomes. For example, at Algolia, timeliness is not the best feature that the engineering teams have, and coming from a project management background, very customer-facing, it was kind of jarring at first, where I would join a meeting, 5 minutes pass by, the engineers are just starting to trickle into a meeting. It's great and all for internal meetings, but when we're done dealing with other stakeholders, it's about trying to drive that understanding with the engineering teams. Hey, we're gonna meet with these people, can you be on time? And then I usually give them the 1-minute grace period during those sessions before I ping them on Slack and get them on the meeting. But that's an unspoken rule. Everybody sets the meetings at the top of the hour, but everybody knows that it comes about at the 5-minute mark. Also, with the timeliness of these meetings, it kind of gives you an insight into what motivates these teams. For example, my teams are motivated by creativity and in-person interactions. So I know that offsites have become a big topic for companies, especially during the lay of the land now, where cutbacks on costs are a thing. But these engineering teams do benefit from having interactions in person, because you get to actually feel the ideas and expressions between topics being shared. Also, using structured and unstructured interview in anthropology, I like to parallel with agenda-led meetings versus chit-chats. You can have an agenda set on a weekly cadence with your engineering team, but also just pinging them randomly on a Thursday afternoon does wonders. You just kind of have to have that communication. Of course, it doesn't work with everybody, so you need to know who your audience is. But it's really about just creating that connection with the engineer and the teams. I literally try to have a 5-minute session before the meeting starts to actually check in with the human on the other side. It's how's life? Being able to actually recall is an important skill. So if they tell you, hey, I've just recently moved, or I'm going on vacation, my child was born, being able to then tie that back to your communications in the future really gives them a sense of being seen and understood. And then that gives you the cues and insights into what's actually going on in their life that could then potentially impact your projects. Also, these syncs come about and they give you insights into tribal knowledge. This is basically the information that one engineer knows because they either worked on the project when they first joined or they troubleshooted a bug a while ago for it, and nobody else in the company knows because it's just outdated documentation. Things have changed since the time of implementation, and basically your job at that point is to then create that shared documentation, update the team to make sure that we can then work on having a knowledge that then the rest of the team can rely on. Linguistic analysis and application. Really, it's about understanding the specific terms and jargons that your teams use. So take my billing team, for example. In the company, when they say billing team, you have two branches. You have the finance side of billing, then you also have the platforms team, which is the engineers. I can't tell you the amount of times that I see a message coming through of people saying, hey, we need help with getting this invoice redacted or reshaped. The billing didn't go out. What's the contract? And we're kind of like just the engineering team, and we're like, well, you kind of have to go to this other function, which, I mean, unfortunately, their email is actually just called billing@algolia.com instead of billingplatform@algolia.com. So just those nuances can actually influence how you interact with the rest of the company. To that end, it also helps with communication styles, being able to understand how each person is different. I'm sure that we all have certain ways that we like to interact with specific individuals, so being able to get that and actually mold your interaction with your engineers based on how they are helps in actually driving points through. For example, also, there's a lot said in unspoken words. So when you start seeing an engineer that used to have their camera on, starts taking more of a back seat, more reserved, more quiet, you need to try to figure out why something's come about. I've had meetings where I just sit with the engineer and I'm like, hey, how are you feeling? How's the project impacting your life? Checking in on the personal side of things to see maybe there's something going on that they might need assistance with. Maybe there's a risk of burnout. So being able to understand how they are being impacted and how you can communicate to them to get to that same understanding is important. Also, mediating discussions between teams. As we've heard earlier, we're kind of the translator for the business between tech and business. To be able to do that, we've actually implemented a glossary within our How to Work With Us space in Confluence, where basically when teams are coming to us to ask for requests, they kind of start using some of the lingo and words that we are more adapted to. When I see requests coming through, I'm actually the first barrier who then is like, okay, do you have screenshots? Do you have the application ID? Trying to get more of the information to then put it in front of the engineers to have a quicker turnout instead of wasting their time and trying to support the request that came through. Also, not just with other teams that are not as technical, but within your teams, you have to act as a mediator. Sometimes our job is to be a counselor, a third-party, unbiased person that sits in a meeting between two engineers that are butting heads, being able to help them kind of come to an understanding. And this comes about truly when there's high pressure, there's a tight deadline, there's a huge request that came through, there's a bug that threw everything off, and especially in environments where they share the production environment, kind of like a lot of the finger pointing can come about, so then it's being able to help with coming to a same table and saying, this is understanding both perspectives, and if you have a team that's having much discussion between themselves, then at that point, you kind of just have to have those hard discussions. And then, in today, even with proper punctuation, things can be misinterpreted in plain text. So I actually like to rely on emoji and GIF use in my communication with my teams. These are some of the ones that I mostly use on my day-to-day, just because either something's going crazy, there's an urgent request that came through, there's a joy in actual importance of like, hey, we've done something great. And then if somebody says something funny, that orangutan with the deceased look on his face is actually pretty great. Material culture analysis is more about helping to examine how the tools and artifacts that your teams use can influence their work patterns and interactions. Some of the things that I've been doing lately, now that I've gone from 2 teams to 7 teams, is actually cataloging all of the different subscriptions that each of these teams have and understanding who owns that subscription. Let me tell you, everybody loves signing up for the free trial and saying, hey, we need to then pay for this. Who's going to pay for it? Nobody wants to take the responsibility of paying. But I mean, and kudos to our department for collections. They're really good at chasing us. I know that. They chase me all the time. And if I'm feeling impacted by their pressure, I can only imagine how that impacts an engineer's day-to-day, especially if they have to do smaller things like uploading a receipt to justify the cost that came through. So lately, I kind of just understand who signed up where. I try to take that burden on for them. Of course, as my role maybe changes in the near future, then as being able to make it more sustainable. Okay, do we then make the engineering managers be more responsible for the actual payments instead of just having everybody sign up and it's a free reign out there if they all sign up. Especially now with the rise of AI tools, there's a lot of experimentation and people are wanting to see what works. So then being able to understand who's using what, how the access request flow is gonna be, because I've had multiple people saying, hey, we need access to this. Okay, who do you need to go to ask for the actual access? Is it gonna cost extra? So having an understanding of the actual subscriptions in play will give you that understanding. And I know we can all get attached to the team members and programs that we work with, but this actually helps with those transitions when somebody does leave the company, when you have to move on to another role or another company as well. So being able to have everything documented in a nice way that can then be transitioned over to whoever else is gonna take on will help in that onboarding experience. And one of my favorites is cross-cultural comparison. So systemically comparing practices across the different teams, orgs, and even companies. So for example, coming to a TPM conference is really about understanding how you TPMs are doing things differently in different companies, what I can take back to my company and implement. But one of the things to keep in mind is when you're working with your teams, some can be apprehensive at first of somebody coming in and looking into their rituals or practices. So I like to kind of start off with, hey, I'm coming here for inspiration. I'm not necessarily wanting to change things all in all, but it's just a matter of trying to make sure that they understand you're there to learn and actually improve their life instead of coming in to criticize and potentially try to change things without their buy-in. The insights gained could then inform process improvements, team structures, and even company cultural shifts. So being able to take the time for those feedbacks and tips and then work with the actual engineer manager or the team heads to actually implement the changes that you're suggesting will help in actually driving that. And then with, for example, the guilds from Datadog, I actually am speaking with our people organization to try to implement that. We do have Slack channels of interest, but the fact that there's no guild behind it, I think really kind of takes away from what they're trying to achieve in those spaces. So we're trying to implement guilds now. So some of the most powerful rituals for us TPMs are going to be those about sharing. So being able to, I mean, there's retrospectives, there's postmortems, the daily syncs, and in particular, one of the rituals that I found that really helps in giving me insights is that of the round tables. I'm actually, shout out to Coda, they had the Play to Elevate conference back in June. They had a session dedicated to round tables. Within that, they tackled one topic. You basically time box it for 30 minutes. You're bringing in engineers and other stakeholders from different teams to kind of talk on that one topic. And then as a moderator, it's important that everybody does share a thought and a takeaway at the end of the meeting to then be able to see and actually share the knowledge and see how your different teams are interacting. And in hosting these, it gives that neutral zone of an environment where they don't feel like they're going to be criticized because they're coming together to just share their ideas. And pursuing this ritual, it'll create an inclusive environment that nurtures sharing. And you may find that some of your teams, sort of like mine, are same but different. We have my teams that are doing all the Scrum methodology, but some of them are doing sprints of 1 week versus 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Some are doing story pointing religiously. Some are not. When they're not, of course, the business is saying, hey, why is this team not pointing like everybody else? It's not to say that they're not being productive, it's just that they have a different way of actually achieving impact and meeting their goals without having to do story pointing. So then the conversation becomes, how can we bring them to the actual story pointing to help with all of the reporting that is done in the company, but without actually impacting their momentum, because at the same time, I don't want to come in and just be like, hey, we need to start story pointing because everybody else is as well. And then some of our teams are actually having different ritual leads. So in one of them, a staff EM does the sessions, another has a principal engineer actually running them. And with that in mind, I'm actually taking that approach of let's give some of our engineers more responsibility and maybe have them on a rotation basis. You can run the engineering session for sprint planning, retros. That way, when they do want to become engineer managers or higher level individual contributors, they have exposure and experience in doing some of these other things that can't be expected of them. And if it isn't evident, I'm a firm believer that unleashing anthropology and its methods can fuel our tech teams. So in blending these methods, the TPM will be on the path to decoding the engineering team's culture and gaining a more nuanced and holistic view of their teams. You're a part of the team, so make sure you live and breathe it. Improve team dynamics, both internally and cross-functionally. This deeper insight can lead to more effective and impactful ways that your teams are functioning, that you can manage your projects and programs, and then also yield higher impact. And one of the greatest things about applying anthropological methods as a TPM is that we can take action, we can give guidance, and we can drive the processes to help our teams and programs, and even shape our own company's culture. And my hope for you all is that if you get to apply these in your day-to-day, as you're navigating the human side of tech, that you listen out for your team's tribal heartbeat. Thank you.
Questions, anyone?
So I have a quick question.
Yep.
Connecting with your engineer, right? Checking in on them, trying to make sure you're aware of what's going on in the background, their work, your team. What's been successful in a remote-first world? How do you casually connect in that space? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think, like I mentioned, having those quick syncs that are not scheduled. So my team is actually pretty scattered. We have 3 engineers in Paris and 3 others in the US. I have one in Nebraska, I have one in Wisconsin, and I have one in South Carolina. And I'm in New York. So on top of that, it's just very, like, aside from the hour difference, it's just I know that depending on who I'm trying to talk to, whether it's in the morning, I'll try to set up something the night before so that when they come in, they could approve the meeting, and then next thing you know, I'm talking to them. Or I just Slack them on like a quick whim, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? I usually try to actually start with how's it going beyond asking first, like, hey, I need this, because that gives them that sense of you're checking in. Also, not being afraid to say, hey, do you have time for a quick huddle? Even if it's something that you know you can get an answer via written text, just being able to kind of like connect and see them face to face via virtual space actually gives them that sense of connection.
We have a question from online audience. What is your favorite emoji to diffuse a tense message convo?
Let me see, let's go back. Hopefully I can. So there's the flamethrower cat. That one actually is the best one just because it kind of, I mean, who doesn't like cats, as we've seen? But just kind of like it does give that sense of some things, I'm not okay with this, but in a joking way. Also, that shaking cat does wonders for when an intense request comes through, when somebody's like, hey, we need to talk about this, and then you just kind of reply with that emoji. And then that this is fine, that really just kind of says everything, where even if they are having disagreements between themselves, I'll just drop that one in, and then they know that, hey, we should probably talk. Let's set up a meeting or try to mediate whatever you're needing help with. Well, I'm around, so feel free to approach me if you have any other questions, and see you guys later.